Hi, everybody. This is Bob Ost, and you're seeing me right now with my guests today, Jeff Whiting and Kaya Littleturtle, who I'll tell you more about soon. I want to tell you about True in the meantime, first of all, so that you understand who we are and what we do. TRU, we're Theater Resources Unlimited, and we're an art service organization, and we help. Originally, we were dedicated to helping producers, which it never occurred to anybody that producers needed help. But about 29, 30 years ago, I was and still am a writer, and I was meeting producers and um, finding out how difficult a time they were having in getting things done. It's hard to be a producer. Those of you who are artists who always assume that producers have it all together and know exactly what to do, not true, not true. Producers actually have a tough time of it. And so we started an organization that was dedicated to having producers network and meet each other and find ways to help each other. And we started evolving over the years, and we started discovering that people other than the Nederlanders and the Schuberts actually produced. And so we started realizing there was a whole group of people out there called self-producing artists. Um, those are people that like me, writers and directors and actors, instead of waiting around for a producer to find them and make something happen with their careers, they take the initiative and make it happen themselves. Um, I want to start off, actually, I should have started off by saying that I'm coming to you today from Connecticut on vacation, if you call this a vacation. I'm in the land of the Algonquin-Nahantic Indians, and normally I come to you from Manhattan, which is the homeland of the Lenape Indians. In particular, I want to mention that today because we're going to be talking about sensitivity to indigenous issues in theater. It's a very specific goal today for us to think a little bit more sensitively about indigenous and all people. So we've been doing these Zoom rooms since April 17th, 2020. This, if my counting is correct, is the 119th consecutive week of doing conversations with people who I think are really interesting and really worth listening to. It started off just as an opportunity for all of us to come together in a room instead of being alone and isolated in our homes during. Oh, did you know there was something called COVID? Did everybody know that? We were in shutdown. Surprise? Yes. Oh no. So we decided that we could do something about it. Well, I had no idea what to do. I was I was a mess when we went into shutdown. Um, we were told that we were going into shutdown the day after my birthday, and I saw Come From Away in a very crowded audience. And then I found out maybe that wasn't such a good idea. But here we are, thrown into this whole world that we never expected to be in. And I didn't really ever want to know what Zoom was. I just didn't want to know it. But I was convinced by some people who were smarter than me and calmer than me that maybe I could do something in Zoom and bring people together, and we'd have an opportunity to still be a community during the month or two of shutdown that we were going to be in, which turned into 6 months, which turned into a year, which turned into 2 years, which turned into here we are now. I think that we're all in a better position now. I think there is a greater degree of safety in terms of us being out there and communing in public, but we still also have to be very realistic about the fact that COVID's still here. COVID is so clever, and it keeps finding new ways of expressing itself, like so many of us have been trying to do during COVID itself. And to be honest, most of us are relatively safe. We're not going to get really sick. We probably won't be hospitalized, but for the sake of the people, and there are people out there who are very vulnerable to this, we should all be very, very conscious of it and really be careful. Everybody be careful. Um, so that's my weekly reminder that we're on a planet that's a big planet with a lot of us, and we really should think about everyone, not just ourselves. Um, so I'm going to actually turn the conversation now to something that, well, the conversations used to be about creating art in Zoom, creating art in isolation. And then things happened like George Floyd. And then suddenly there was something called We See You, White America, White American Theater, which was a protest by members of the BIPOC community who were in theater, who were righteously angered and frustrated by our business and how we did things. And since we were in isolation, it was hard to turn away. We had no place to sort of hide from all of this. And so I think a lot of us became very aware that there are other ways of doing things and there are other ways of relating to the world around us in a more inclusive way. This led me on a sort of journey of discovery, and I found a couple of very interesting things that were happening around the country. And one of the things that I found, courtesy of Jeff Whiting, who you see right now, is something called the Lost Colony, which is an outdoor performance. And if I'm not mistaken, it's the longest running outdoor, continuously running outdoor performance in, is it the world or just the United States?
I think it's the US, yeah.
It's the US, okay. And in 2013, Jeff, Jeff, why don't I bring you and Kaya on, and let's meet you, and then we'll start talking about where we're going with all this. I think you know where we're going with all this. Kaya, why don't you say hi to us? I know you're a member of the Lumbee tribe, and you're in North Carolina, right?
Yes, yeah. I come from the Lumbee and Tuscarora peoples of North Carolina. My home community is in Back Swamp, which is where I'm at right now. But yeah, so I was brought on board to help get some more authenticity to the production in regards
We'll go
to
to that.
Native
We'll go to
treatment.
that. We're going to get to that. Well, I want to know more about your background first. Why was it you that Jeff, or how did Jeff find you, and what is your background other than being Native American? That your artistic background. Tell us a little bit about that. You're a storyteller, you're among other things, right?
Yeah. So I'm a singer, a dancer, a linguist. But I also do consultant work for various tribes and organizations across the United States and Canada for cultural interpretation and revitalization. Been doing that now for well over a decade. And it has taken me also into theatrical arts because our songs and our dances are a form of artistic expression. And so I've been able to find myself on various stages across the US where we've been able to do some cultural interpretative artistic work involving our culture. And so I stay quite busy with that. I'm also an employee at the Lumbee tribe, once again dealing with cultural work and revitalization for the community amongst our young people and our elders. And I do a lot of work also in substance abuse recovery and dealing with historical trauma, intergenerational trauma in our indigenous communities from some of the things that we encountered during colonization.
Well, thank you. That was pretty. Well, maybe it seemed thorough. It was a lot for us to know, and I think it's very valuable for us to know. Jeff, well, I know you directed a benefit for us at Lincoln Centers, and I've known you on and off for other reasons too. I can't remember how many ways we know each other, but welcome, and tell us a little bit about your background as well.
Yeah, thank you. Great to see you again, Bob. And hi, everybody. I'm honored to be here and talk about these exciting new developments in theater. I am by trade, I started as an actor as a child, and I work primarily as a director and as choreographer. I've been Susan Stroman's associate for the last 14 years. Starting with Young Frankenstein. So I've been lucky to be at her side doing lots of new shows. Young Frankenstein, Big Fish, Scottsboro Boys, Bullets Over Broadway. I was also the associate director of Hair on Broadway, and do a lot of directing on my own. I primarily do musicals, although I love a good play, but nobody ever asked me to do plays. But
I'll ask you.
yeah, please. I love it anytime. But I love doing that. And I also, my other side jobs are I own and run a studio called the Open Jar Studios right here in Times Square. That's where I am today. We're on the corner of 48th and Broadway. It's been open now. We just passed our 3rd year anniversary. So we were almost a year old when COVID turned the world upside down. So I've been running that studio for a while. I also run a theater training program called the Open Jar Institute, which is we're going to be hitting our 20th year here coming up next summer. We do a summer program. We bring in students from around the world to come and work with Broadway folks for a week in the summer. We have a great time doing that. So that's a little bit about me, but I'm honored to be. Thanks for inviting us.
Oh, good. I love having you. I'm so happy to see you. You were phenomenal to work with on the benefit. I'll never forget that. It was such a good experience for me personally. Let's move to the Lost Colony. I don't mean virtually move to it. I mean let's turn the conversation to the Lost Colony, and let's give everybody a little bit of background on it before we get to what may not have been working. Because it was very successful and it ran for decades. When did it first open? And it was written by a Pulitzer Prize winning playwright, Paul Green.
Yes, Paul Green wrote the original script. It opened in 1937. So this summer is their 85th season. So it's been running all except for, there were 2 years, one being 2020, where it didn't play because of COVID, and one other year there was another season it couldn't run. But aside from that, this will be the 85th season. And Paul Green wrote the original script, and it was originally intended to be a dedication to Virginia Dare, who was known as the first baby who was born from folks who came over from England. And so it was done as what was intended to be just a one-night celebration of her birthday, which actually was yesterday. August 18th is her birthday. And it was just
Do you mean to tell me I really scheduled this appropriately?
Yeah, you did. You hit it perfectly. So it was just supposed to be a one-night event, and it was such a huge success that they turned it into a whole summer event. And so it runs from the end of May through the end of August. The show will close, actually this weekend will be their last weekend performances. But yeah, it's been running for 85 years. So tell us a little bit about what the show's about and what it used to be. Let's just say that another turning point for you was that in 2013, not for you but for the show, in 2013 it did win a Tony Award. Yes.
You weren't brought in until
I was brought in 2021, so this is my second year. Yeah, it was.
Let's talk about the history of the show a little bit.
Yeah, the story of the show. Essentially, it's the story is talking about a real American mystery, which is the first group that came over to the Americas from England. They convinced Queen Elizabeth to let them come over. They brought a group of people. They did some scouting and said, oh yeah, let's build a settlement here. So Sir Walter Raleigh raised money. They went back to England and they said, we're going to bring, a colony and really start an establishment there. So it's the story about, how those folks came over to England, how they, tried to survive. On their journey, they came against a lot of troubles at sea, lost a lot of grain, landed later than they had planned. And so when they arrived, they didn't have time to plant enough food, and so come wintertime they were starving. And so they the governor of the town said, well, I'm going to go back and get some more supplies and I'll come back before Christmas and hopefully bring supplies. Well, around that time England was at war with Spain. The Queen forbade them from returning, so they didn't return for another 3 years. And when they returned, everybody who had been in that colony what we now call the Lost Colony, had disappeared, and there's no sign of where they went. There was 2 clues written in one of the trees was the letter CRO, and there's speculation that they traveled to Croatoan, and so it's a real mystery. Nobody really knows what happened to them. There's been lots of speculation around it, but so this show is really about that story of those English settlers who wanted to come over and begin a settlement here. Of course, it has to do with their interaction with the Native Americans, who of course were here already, and so that being written in 1937, there was a very different approach to that, and so in 2020, late 2020. The board of directors came to me and asked me if I'd be interested in helping to reshape it. Should I stop there for a second?
Yeah, let me take it in a different direction for a
Sure.
second.
Sure.
I want to talk to Kaya for a second.
Yeah.
Kaya, you lived in the area where the show was performed. Is that correct or no? Or
I stay 3.5, 4 hours away inland from where the actual show happens. But a lot
and
of
when you were growing up, were you aware of the show?
vaguely.
Vaguely, okay. At what point did it become on your radar? Was it simply because you were brought in as an eye on what they were doing, or did you know
No,
anything?
no, I participated in the show 2012, I want to say.
Oh, so you're the reason it won the Tony.
Yes,
That's right.
Okay.
that's exactly right. I did that. But I was actually one of the first Native American people, indigenous people to actually be in the show, and I portrayed Upawak that season, and it was a much different show then than what it is now.
Well, that's what I want to talk about. I mean, if you don't mind us going into sensitive areas, I really want to know how it felt for you to be in that show, and at what point did you feel that it needed to change, or were you relieved when somebody else felt that it would change? Were you part of the campaign to say, hey, let's be a little bit more aware of the reality here?
Yeah, so there was a couple of red flags back when I was part of it. I was a little confused going into it because when I realized that I was the only indigenous person in it, I said, well, we definitely have to have more indigenous people because they have all these Indian roles. But at that time, it was a common practice for non-native people to be portraying native people on stage. And some of the things that they did were very stereotyped and culturally and racially insensitive. And that just, I don't think that came from a place of malice. I think it just came from a place of being uneducated. I can't say that I encountered any malice there. I just encountered a lot of uneducation. And over the years, there's been quite a few people that brought that up, that there need to be changes that need to be made, such as authentic song and dance and not very Hollywood version, not real things. There needed to be authentic Algonquin language spoken. There needed to be more authentic regalia and things of that nature. And so we made those moves to do that while I was part of the show as a cast member, as an AT, as an actor technician portraying Upawak. There were quite a few things, such as people use the word red face. That I guess for the definition of what red face is, I mean that happened. But once again, I'll say I want to make it very clear that I don't think it was their goal to be mean or things like that, because I encountered very nice people that year that I was in it.
Well, in our culture in
uneducation.
general, in our culture in general, there are well, I won't say it, but there was a good portion of the population that want to be sensitive, that do not want to be insensitive, let's put it that way. There are others that are stubbornly attached to the way they think things should be, whether or not that is appropriate in the eyes of other people. We're stuck in this loop right now. I don't know how long. It doesn't look like we're getting out of it. I thought that before 2016, I thought we were a lot farther ahead than we apparently are. So I understand that people in general, I'd like to think that most of us don't mean to be malicious, but some of us do wind up inadvertently being ignorant. So you identified a couple of the things within the script that needed to be looked at. I mean, the use of the word red face, we will make note that that is not culturally appropriate. The idea that it would have been preferable to have indigenous people playing indigenous people, that's something we've become a little bit more aware of over the years. What else? What other things? Were there any other details or nuances in the script that could have used a little bit of tweaking?
Yeah. So in particular, the character of Agona was she became the I should say the wife or companion of Old Tom, who was a very central character in the overall production. In years past, her character was portrayed as very savage acting and uneducated, and it was very, in my opinion, it was very disrespectful to indigenous women, the way that Agona was portrayed. And I'm very, very glad that we've been able to bring a lot more respect towards that. And the thing I want to say too is just kind of jumping forward, and I'll kind of jump back. But even like last season to this season, like we're constantly growing, and it's something that I'm excited about, because last season was a learning experience, and then this season we've learned from last season and was able to kind of build, and then going into next season we'll continue to build, which is something I'm really happy about, because when you think about 83 years of telling a story in a very particular way, and now you're adding a entire another element into it, as far as with all the indigenous actors as part of it now, and a different layers this now. 83 years is a lot of things to sift through, and I think that the production team and Jeff and everybody are doing a fantastic job navigating those waters. Some of the other things that were a big deal, in my opinion, that we made some changes to, was we also gave some more gravitas to the character of Chief Wingina. We've dealt with his passing a lot more gracefully, I feel like, because in years past, there was a theatrical beheading on stage, and then a bloody bag representing his head in the bag that was tossed around, and that actually happened while I was in the play. Let me say this: I am not opposed to violence, the portrayal of violence against Native people, but I am opposed to the glorification of it. Meaning that it needs to be equally told. If we're going to go and go like all this violence on Native people, I mean, it was a battle. There was violence that happened on both sides. What we don't want to get into is the romanticism of violence, to where Native people have to sit and watch their people get massacred on stage night after night after night after night. It's a very strange thing to have to deal with. It's like watching a Western on repeat over and over and over again. It's not something, So I don't want to sit back and say like, oh, well, we don't want to ever see violence against Native, because it happened. Historically, it happened. There was conflict there. We're fine with this. We've had deep conversations with this. But shared violence, shared conflict, so that the entire conflict is represented equally.
Well, the other
I think it's important.
Okay, the way I look at it is, I always say that a villain doesn't know they're a villain. So as writers, it is our duty to make sure that everyone that we put on that stage is coming from a genuine place. They're behaving in the way that they would behave because they're human, they're people. So it seems like what you were trying to do is trying to get the Native American point of view into the characters rather than the stereotypical thing that we place on the stereotypes. I mean, just look at Hollywood for the past God knows how many years, 100 years. Very rarely has an image of a Native American character come across as being solid and human and complex. They're devices in so many plots. So I'm very glad to hear this, that the Lost Colony, people involved with the Lost Colony did come to this realization, or they probably had been at this realization for a long time. They probably knew. Many of those people had to have known. Oh, Jeff, tell what you know of this story. I mean, how did they approach you? Why you? And
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think
how long have they been thinking about doing this? I don't think it was an overnight decision.
No, certainly not. They knew the issues were there. They had in 2020, early 2020, there was a young college student who really called out the organization, saying, this practice of hiring actors that are not native to play native characters is not right. And so it sort of made a big splash in the news down in that area. And at that time, they said, we really do need to do something about it. And when COVID hit, they just said, let's just, so they had to pause anyways, but they said, this is a good time. Let's go ahead and make these changes. So the board of directors at that time did a director search. They reached out to a number of directors, and I was on that list. And they came to me saying, here's the show that's been running 83 years. We want to do a couple of things. One, it needs to be updated for a modern day audience. We want to make sure that it, has, appeals to a modern day audience. And the other thing we want to do is we want to correct this, the depiction of native characters in the show, and we want to make a commitment that we will only hire indigenous performers to play in those roles, and we want to find a way to still honor Paul Green's script. It's known as Paul Green's Lost Colony, and is a Pulitzer Prize winner, and so there was a real desire to try to retain as much of his dialogue as possible. Well, under these directions, meaning, let's make sure that the story can still be compelling and told to a modern day audience, but let's also find ways and where there needs to be things rewritten in order to be more accurate and also more respectful to all the cultures involved. Let's make those adjustments. And so that was sort of the task that was set to me. So I took some time, made some proposals about how I felt that could be done, made, that proposal to the board. And then obviously I was chosen to go ahead. And so when they said, we'd like you to be the one to do it, I said, before I say yes, I want to make sure I have somebody at my side who is Native American, because I am not, I don't have that background at all. And so I reached out to my alma mater. I went to Brigham Young University, studied theater there. And they have a wonderful program there where they have a large group of Native American folk that live there, and they have a performing group that performs there. And so I reached out to the woman who directs that group, and I just said, is there somebody in that group who is a director or a choreographer who I could lean on? I don't want to take this project unless I know that there's somebody who I can refer to, who can help guide me along that way. She introduced me to a wonderful choreography, Jared Tottacini, who's from out west and who's a wonderful hoop dancer and choreographer. And so after he said, yeah, I I talked to him about the project and expressed what what my wants were, that I needed somebody really to rely on to make sure that I was gonna, my intention was correct, but I didn't know what mistakes I might make. And so when he said yes, that's when I turned around and said, yeah, I'll take on the project. Wisely.
Curious, just
Time.
curious. In
Yeah.
addition to the adjustments that were going to be made to the sensitive areas of the script, were they already thinking of updating the technology? Because I know part of what you've done is you've updated the technology in the piece.
Yeah, I think there was a hope that we would find a way to, utilize, whatever technologies might be available, but they didn't require anything. They just said, we definitely want to update it. And of course, that my mind goes there because modern audiences have some of those expectations. So as we went into the writing and the creative process of figuring it out, yeah, I went down to the space initially to just see it and understand. It's a beautiful, beautiful amphitheater right on the Sound. It's the most gorgeous backdrop you could ever imagine. And then when the sun goes down, there's a perfect opportunity for projection. So I knew immediately that I wanted 3D projections to be a part of that. And so in going into that, to knowing that I would try to use some of those technologies, I enlisted a writer to help as well. I enlisted David Thompson, writer of the Scottsboro Boys, who agreed to come on board and really help to shape the script. He understood that the desire was to keep it as Paul Green's work, but he understood obviously that would require some reshaping and retooling.
I'm going to ask you a tough and impossible question. If Paul Green were to see it today, would he be pleased?
I think so. I've heard many people, the Paul Green organization, who's maintains his vision. They saw the show last year, and this year they've been wonderfully supportive. They themselves, I don't know if Paul Green would have. I've had many people tell me that Paul Green was involved in the rewrites of the show all the way up until 1974, and so he was always invested in making it better, making it stronger. So all indications
are 34 years of rewrites. There's a title that we can
believe that. Yeah. So I think I would have to imagine that he would have, certainly had he been alive, he would have wanted to continue to tweak it and make it applicable for today's audiences to understand it, as it were. So I think we took very close care to make sure that it was, his as much as possible.
Okay, I'm going to ask you another one of those impossible questions. The script that you knew, that you were originally aware of, did Paul Green did he get any of it right, or was it really just based on mythology that was common American mythology?
I think he did the best that he could with what he had at the time.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. The European side of the script was amazing. I've been involved with a lot of theatrical productions that, didn't have near the level of detail the Lost Colony takes to the dialogue, to the costumes and regalias and everything. So on the European side of things, it was like, top notch. The indigenous point of view was below standard, but Paul Green had no way of knowing that. Okay. There was not dialogue between this theatrical community that was going on, that was predominantly of European descent, and the indigenous communities. There wasn't that communication, and for a long time, and I'll be honest with you, for a long time, I don't even think people knew how to even get those conversations started. So it's not like I feel like that they were trying to shut them out. I don't feel like that they even knew who to talk to or how to even start that. And I'm going to be completely and totally honest with you here. Speaking on my people, we are naturally reserved, and meaning that our communities are very typically, especially in the past, were very closed off communities. we didn't really like people coming up trying to talk to us. So I can't even say that back in the day, if they would have reached out, if my people would have even been receptive to those kind of conversations, they'd been like, who are you? Why do we care? You know? So, but a lot of things have changed. On both sides of the conversation, a lot of minds have changed. So I'll say that Paul Green did the absolute best he could in the time period that he was raised in as he knew it to be.
Well, that's very fair and very kind of you. Thank you. Jeff, did you want? I'm not sure whether we talked about it. Did you want to show some sort of excerpt from it, or I didn't know whether to share screen with you or not.
Oh, I don't have an excerpt with me. I
Okay,
could
that's fine.
pull one up while we're chatting. I could certainly look to find a few things, but
Just if you can, but it's not.
yeah,
I'm not sure whether we planned on that or not. So surprise.
find a few things. But yeah, I'll look as we keep chatting. But I see the question there in the chat about was a complete rewrite from the indigenous point of view contemplated. To that question, yeah, when David Thompson and I, went into it, we thankfully had forged a great partnership with Kaya and the chairman of the Lumbee tribe, and we said to them, we want to do this right. And Kaya was so gracious and kind to really walk us through it. We did actually change the original conceit of the show is that it was told by a park ranger who's in the park, a white guy who kind of told the story. And as we began discussing how should we frame the show, how could we make sure that we're representing the point of view of the indigenous people that we were telling the story about, it was in discussion with Kaya and with Chairman Godwin, where it came up that the storytellers in indigenous communities are the elder women in the tribe. And so that came from, so we actually changed the narrator of the show is an indigenous character who is a modern day woman who steps forward and says, let me tell you about what happened right here. Only the trees and the wind really knows what happens, but she takes us through the story. And so that really offered a really, I think, great way to be able to offer the point of view from the indigenous point of view, because we actually see the story through her eyes. And so that was a good starting spot. And along the way, there was dialogue created that is not Paul Green dialogue, that was created for the purpose of making sure that the characters' point of views were represented. And so we worked very closely with Kaya, who was so gracious and not only responding to thoughts and ideas that we had, but also the beginning of the play happens in the Algonquin language. And so Kaya, was able to write, we had ideas and he wrote, so the beginning begins in Algonquin, and later as time goes on, two of the characters travel to England to learn English. And so then when they return from England, then we hear it through their voices having had learned English. So it's a pretty, I think it was a pretty successful way of shifting the point of view to the indigenous point of view by doing that.
Were there other, Kaya and Jeff, were there other indigenous collaborators that you worked with over the past 2 years? Who else was on your team?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier Jared Totticini, who was the choreographer. He worked really closely to help make sure that all the dance and the movement. Kay, I didn't say this, but I'll toot your horn. Wrote some music for the piece, so there is some traditional music in there, but also music that Kaya has written. Kaya's grandmother created the regalia that the indigenous performers wear in the show. And Chairman Godwin, who I mentioned earlier, has been very closely involved along the way. Anybody else, Kaya, we should mention?
Yeah, the really cool thing is that this production has given a way for us to bring in a lot of our artistic traditionalists from our indigenous communities that are already naturally well versed in the mechanics of what they would need to do as far as the portrayal on stage, because a lot of the song and dance is things that they already do. And so we were able to really, especially this season, bring together a team of people that all had very strong contributions musically, and then as far as with dance and everything else, they were really able to kind of each give more and more gravity to the stage with their talents. So I'm really really proud of that, because this has given a way to our people know the value of our culture, of our songs and our dances and our language and our stories. We know the value, but it's still good to be able to go on a stage of the magnitude of the Lost Colony and be so well received and respected and uplifted and be able to share our culture, what we do every day, with the world, really, essentially. And so it's been very big for self-esteem, and morale booster for our indigenous communities to be able to see our people of various ages on that stage, getting uplifted in such a way. I'll be honest with you too. I'll say this last part. Even the non-native cast members, it's been a treat for them. I've talked with a lot of them over the past 2 seasons, and a lot of them have never been exposed to this kind of culture and history and things. And so for them, it's been an enriching experience. And so they've gotten a lot out of it. We do culture night. We did the cast members. They all stay at a place called the Grove Apartments. Because the Lost Colony production actually provides housing over the summer, of course, for the company members. And so we would do a culture night out there where the entire cast and crew is out there, and we get to really kind of give them more intimate details with our culture, and we have different social dances that even they can participate in as non-natives. And it's just been an overall enriching and educational experience for everybody that's involved, and everybody's had a part to play in that.
Well, Candy Carl asks, well, proof. Is there any indication that Paul Green actually reached out to get the direct information from the indigenous people at the time he wrote the piece? My guess would be no. He probably wasn't even aware that it was an option.
Yeah,
No. From my understanding, he based everything off of the John White drawings. And they just did their best to recreate drawings. Now what that means is that all they had was a very blurry snapshot of a moment in time, no music, no actual movement associated with it. And so they would just have a painting, and then they would say, okay, well, how do we make this painting come alive? And so then he would just give his best interpretation of a John White painting of what he thought might be going on. So that's pretty much, from my understanding, what they did.
Yeah. And Bob, I pulled up some visuals. If you want me to share, I could show a couple of visuals from the show. You want me to do that?
In a second, I just want to ask T this question. She wants to know what kinds of audiences you get. Is there any follow-up educational programs for schools and audiences?
Yeah, there's that area down in North Carolina is very touristy. So they get lots of families. So the show is really it's geared for all audiences. There are some gunshots and violence in the show. So young children, sometimes who get, scared by loud noise, but it's really a family show. Because it happens in the summer only, there's not really a lot of educational, schools that are able to come. But throughout the season, they do backstage tours. So those who happen to be traveling, who want the education about the history, there is, a pre-show tour that happens and a little bit of history. And right adjoining it is a beautiful Elizabethan garden, and there's a lot of history that's talked about the show at that point as well.
Okay, I'm going to ask the question, but I assume the answer is no. Do you get indigenous audiences to the show? Basically, because it's a European story.
We have quite a few. So North Carolina has the largest population of indigenous people on the entire East Coast. A lot of people don't know that, but we have over 8 tribes in the state of North Carolina. We have quite a few of our people that drive to the beach to see our people in it, and those numbers have greatly increased since the revisions that's been made. And also, the way that the story's told now, I can only speak on the way it's told now. I can't say that it's just a European story. I mean, yes, it's called the Lost Colony and everything, but the native part of the story is very equally told and represented. So to me, it's
That's
not just a
better than I
story.
was expecting.
It's not, to me, it's not just a story of Europeans anymore. It's literally just that story of the interaction. I mean, we've captured the story of the interaction, and when you think about today, we're still these are topics that we're still dealing with. I'll give you an example here. Manteo, he deals with being more receptive of the colonists, of Christianity, of different things like that, of maybe laying down some of his traditional culture and picking up some more of the European culture. We have those kind of conversations today as far as the give and take of traditionalism versus assimilation culture. And so we still have those conversations between people that's more receptive of assimilation and people that's very gung-ho, fundamentalist, traditionalists. Race relations, still having that topic today, still going on. But I think that this production gives a really beautiful story of strong, holistic approaches to race relations. It can start off shaky, but when we take the time to understand and respect one another, then it ends very, very well, because you do see a lot of conflict that's going on, but at the very end of the show, there's a great moment, I feel like, of resolution, that they're marching together on, and they're taking care of each other and things of that nature. So yeah, I think that the interesting thing about this, and what makes this play so big still today, is the conversations and interactions that are happening in that production still in a version happen today. We're still dealing with some of those same topics, but we're getting to see a glimpse of those topics when they first started in their infancy.
And were those elements of the show in the original with Paul Green, or have they been enhanced more? I still worry about the fact that Paul Green, in his ignorance, but in his willingness to do something good, may have gotten so much wrong. I don't know. It just seems inevitable that he did. But did you find those elements in it, and you were able to bring out those elements?
So I mean, okay, so imagine, okay, so you have the European voice, you have the indigenous voice, and they're very separated, and they really can't hear each other. They want to communicate, but they just can't get there. So what I feel like that we've done is bring those voices together to where they understood, and then in the end we make it one big loud voice. So once again, I'll say that Paul Green used his voice. He's a European. Of course, he's going to get more European things right. If I were to go and try to give a lecture on European culture and migrations in history, I'm going to be speaking from a very novice point of view there, because I don't really know much about the European experience. Vice versa. He's going to speak from a very novice place about it, because he doesn't know the indigenous experience. Does that mean that he meant ill will with it? Not at all, because from my understanding of it, he was a very free thinking man, ahead of his time almost. And so our view on it is this, and I say our because a lot of us indigenous people have had a lot of conversations about this, that yeah, there were 83 years, and there was things that happened in those 83 years that we aren't necessarily happy about. But we're not there anymore. We're at a new place now, and our voice is very loud and heard and respected, and we respect the other voices at the table as well. In our language, we sit back and we say, "Une jakwa digethra," and what that means is that now our minds is one, that we put our minds on the table, because not one person knows everything, but many different people can contribute to the conversation. So we say that got to get rakwas to that, you thought to get a guasneg, and keep that good mind. And so we don't try to focus on these things that that weren't good, because we could focus for hundreds and hundreds of years on things that weren't good, but we don't live there. anymore. We don't allow ourselves to stew in that. Now things are better. Now our minds is one and we're at peace with each other and we can build things. So that's kind of like where I go with it. And so I don't really have a negative opinion at all, Paul Green. I just think he's didn't know.
Do you know
I get more frustrated about people that do know and still choose to not care. That's what gets me.
Yeah. Do you know Tara Diamond by any chance? She's an indigenous writer, and she's also involved in sensitivity conversations. She was a guest of mine a couple months ago. She's very frustrated that in the current Broadway season, we talk a lot about how BIPOC voices were finally heard. BIPOC producers were finally producing shows that were relevant to their own backgrounds and experience. We had 7 or 8 plays by Black playwrights. She's very frustrated that we think we've accomplished so much in the season that did not include an indigenous voice. She's very vocal about the fact that indigenous voices are not heard. I'm not aware of them being heard very much in our culture at all. There are a couple of things. I mean, there's I'd say Netflix Reservation Dogs. There's every now and then there's something that pops up that's saying, "Look at me, we're here." What are some of the other places we should look for indigenous stories so that we can learn more?
You said Reservation Dogs, and that was fantastic. I actually I'm connected to different things that's going on with that, but so the cool thing with the Lost Colony, I'll say, is that I feel like that we set a precedent, and I like that. I like that we set a precedent, and to me that has helped to open the door in the theatrical community for more indigenous storytelling. Now, a lot of what's going on now. Hold on. Interesting that Paul Green did listen to him, right, with other Abrahams. Last of the Lowrys, Lumbee people. Okay, yeah. It's interesting now because we as indigenous people are getting more and more comfortable with getting on those stages and sharing. Before there was a lot of animosity. And I'm going to be honest here, I mean, we have a lot of conversations about like what we view as animosity from non-natives towards natives, but there was animosity that we felt as native people towards non-natives, and we didn't really want to be in those spaces, because we didn't trust what was going on there. There was a distrust there. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. Part of what I do with the Lost Colony is that because I'm involved in so many different indigenous communities, I help to get the word out and recruit native performers that want to be involved with the production. My first year doing it was difficult, recruiting people, because they were like, I don't know about this because I've seen that play and I don't want to be involved with that. And it was hard. It was hard. We got past that season. And then the next season, after they saw, oh, okay, well, they're actually trying to do changes, it's much easier to get people involved with the Lost Colony production. So as these doors are opening, as we have things like Reservation Dogs and all these other things on TV and then also stage, the Native people are saying, oh, well, there really is a social change, and it's safe for us to be able to come out here and share our stories because we finally feel like people's willing to listen to them. That was another thing too. It's like we didn't want to waste our time. I'll tell you, there was times, back when I was in the production as Upper Walk, back in the Lost Colony production back in 2012. I would say to the production team that was involved with it back then, well, maybe we should do it this way, or maybe we should do it that way. And they were like, okay, got that head nod. We never did it that way. They just kind of kept on doing that, but it kind of created frustration in me. And I'm like, well, I'm just not going to say anything. If they don't want to listen, I'm not even going to say nothing.
RK Green has brought up some interesting points about Paul Green, no relation to RK, that indicate that he may have had a real honest goal of understanding the native people and the native experience. Because apparently, I don't remember what Abraham's bosom is about. I do remember the play though. The Last of the Lowrys. He wrote that. That's the Lowrys are the Lumbee people, and he worked with the group and he helped Richard Wright adapt Native Son. If all that's true, then he definitely was somebody that was trying to understand other cultures and be honest about them. Jeff, I'm gonna suggest that you actually show us a few
Sure.
examples, and everybody in the room who's here, while you're looking at these, do think of any additional questions you'd like to ask at the end.
So these are just a few images. Here's a little section of the show. This is utilizing the 3D technology projections. There is a fort that is on the ship, and the actual deck is sand. So it serves as the perfect projection surface for the end of Act 1. We depict the ship that's crossing the sea, so you can see, the effect of the projections on that. This is part of our pre-show actually, where Nikaya is doing one of the native dances. This is before the sun goes down. You can see that sand. That's the actual deck of the show. We have also towards the end of Act 1 a beautiful fire dance before they head off on the journey in the town. Several scenes take place in England. So there you see the Queen's Guard marking her entrance as she comes in. There's a big, beautiful ship that comes in. It's hidden way off stage and it gets pushed on. So we depict the ship behind that fort. That fort is there all night long, so you can see that. Now you start to see there's these little stick puppets. This was one of the things that came out of the effort to, tell the story of the violence that occurred. This came in discussion as we were talking with Kaya and with Chairman Godwin about how perhaps to do it. And the idea came about that, what if instead of actually telling, the story of the violence and human violence, what if, the story, the narrator tells us a story about the bear versus the wolves and how they attack one another. And so that idea really turned into, you see these beautiful puppets designed by Nicholas Mahan, who created this bear in the middle and this wolf, and there's an owl puppet. And so it is part of, we hear a lot of native storytellers talking about, stories told through animal story. This is the bear puppet there, you can see. But it really gives us a great way to, for example, Kaya, you mentioned the beheading of King Wingina, which is part of the history. Instead of doing that, what we do is the wolves and the bear represent one and the other, and the wolves all attack this bear, and so the big bear ends up getting killed and lying on the ground. And as we lift up that bear puppet, below it we see the body of King Wingina. So it's made through a theatrical device of using these puppets, we tell the story without actually showing the human violence one-on-one. Here's the elk that we see in the show. So through use of these beautiful puppets and the performers that really bring them to life, you can kind of get an idea of a bit of what the show is. Here's the opening scene where Manteo and Wonki's first meet the first group who comes over, so you can see a few little ideas of the show. It all does happen in front of this big giant fort that's made to look like what they believe the fort, which is not far from where this theater is. It's right nearby where it all actually happened. Here's the warrior dance that's depicted, that the two natives who came back to England, Manteo and Wonki's came, that's part of history, and they came to learn the culture, to learn the language, and they actually have a scene with the Queen Elizabeth there. So that gives you a little insight as to what the show is. It's a beautiful, unbelievably beautiful location. You can kind of get an idea of bits and pieces of the show there.
Okay, so Jane, do you have a question? Oh,
sorry, inadvertent.
Oh, okay. Thanks for that, Jeff.
No problem.
Kaya, you must have been in some of those pictures. I was looking for you.
Now I I think Jeff's been wanting me to actually be on the stage for quite a while now. I'm considering jumping in it next summer, but
So you're
I'm a
not in it now that you've been working on it.
no, I'm there throughout the summer, kind of overseeing the native side of it, making sure that the continuity is kept throughout the summer. So I'm there quite frequently. And then I have family members that are employed on the stage there. But no, I haven't actually. Well, I take that back. I was going to say I actually haven't been on
Last
the stage.
Saturday.
Yeah, I jumped in the powwow pre-show. We do a celebration of indigenous culture on Fridays and Saturdays prior to the show, and so the cast, the native and non-native cast, talked me into suiting up and getting on the stage. And that was actually my first time performing on the Lost Colony stage in about a decade. Felt good, and I think that kind of sold me on getting in it next summer if my schedule permits. I'm a very wide open person, and I know we all are. I like I said before, I do a lot of cultural interpretative work, and when I say cultural interpretative work, I go into indigenous communities and help them to revitalize and overcome historical trauma issues in their community. And then also I go into organizations and help to set up in sensitive indigenous matters and make sure that they handle them appropriately and things. So that takes me all across the United States and Canada. I was just up in Canada for 2 weeks and all that kind of good stuff. So I do stay quite busy, but I can honestly tell you that my work with the Lost Colony has been some of the most rewarding work that I've ever been a part of, just because of the great approach that the people have taken to it. And I've met some of the nicest people that I've ever met in my entire life, professionally and personally, in my dealings with the Lost Colony. I mean, they're just a great group of people. And working with Jeff and the team that he's brought in to oversee things, they're just a great group.
Can you point us in the direction of any other works of theater or TV or film that would be considered accurate and sensitive portrayals of the indigenous experience? I don't want to put you on the spot for that, but I think a lot of us are going to become interested in seeing more and learning more.
Yeah. All right. So Smoke Signals is a big one. If you're interested, that's a movie. You can find that pretty well anywhere on a streaming service. I think it's pretty popular movie. Smoke Signals is a good one. We have Strike at the Wind outdoor drama that our indigenous community puts on during the summertime. There is various different outdoor dramas. I think there's Tecumseh over in Chillicothe, Ohio. Reservation Dogs, you mentioned, I think is really kind of spearheading the lead on contemporary indigenous storytelling. We were part of and still do Native American dance theater. And what I mean by that is that we do programming across the United States where we it's usually an hour and a half to 2 hours, and we share history, song, and dance involving our indigenous people, where we break down our different styles of dancing and the history and the stories that go along with that. And we're able to educate, but also give an artistic, theatrical expression in the middle of that. And so that's really been great. We do that usually at a lot of universities and different theatrical settings. I know that was kind of like a lot, but that's some of the stuff. But I would definitely recommend, if any of you want to watch a good movie, as the weather's changing, Smoke Signals is an amazing piece of theater to watch. Cinema to watch. Also, Colonial Williamsburg up in Virginia does a lot of great cultural interpretative work. I've done a lot with them. And then going into Jamestown, I did work with Jamestown on the History Channel, and they have a great depiction of the Virginia Algonquin speakers, who were relatives and cousins to the Algonquins that are portrayed in the Lost Colony production.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I have muted myself so that I was trying to type some of it into the chat. I didn't want to drown you out with my typing. Jeff, what's up for you next? What are you doing now?
I'm flying to Los Angeles next week. I'm doing a production of Young Frankenstein out at La Mirada Playhouse. So
With or without Susan?
not with Susan, but it'll be her direction and choreography. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You may
Well,
swing hello.
I'm going to thank you both very much for being with me today. I think it was, I mean, I thought it was a very inspiring conversation. I didn't know how successful it had been in capturing a certain honesty about the indigenous experience, and I'm pleased to hear from you, Kaya, that it is that successful. It's running through end of August. It's like another week.
Tomorrow, it'll run through tomorrow is the last night.
Oh, tomorrow. Okay, I'll jump on a bus and head down there now.
Yes. But it runs the end of May through end of August each summer.
Oh.
So if you can't
Okay,
get
so guys, next summer, who wants to go on a trip down to Manteo? Is that where it is?
Manteo, yeah.
Manteo.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah, join it.
Okay, so again, thank you very much for being part of the conversation today. I want to thank my community. I want to thank my viewers out there. I hope you'll join us next week. We're going to actually talk about TV. We have some guests from the TV land who are going to talk about how to pitch your work for television, and also how to understand that TV is now a multi-platform medium. We'll talk about TV as a multi-platform medium. So hopefully you'll find that interesting and maybe even useful. I do this every week. This is the pitch. Let me see if I can get the screen here. Nope, that still shows you. That's so funny. I'm going back. Okay, so I want to thank everybody again for being with us, and I want to also suggest to those of you who are out in YouTube or in podcast land that you may want to actually come into the room itself and join us and be part of the conversation. So we're here every Friday. We open at 5 o'clock. We bring our guests on at 5:30. If you want to be part of that, you can send me an email at trunltd@aol.com. That's trunltd@aol.com. We'd love to have you be part of the group, part of the community. And also we do this as a public service sort of thing, and we're free, and we're really pay what you can. And I just want everybody to understand that pay what you can would be very useful for us. We have expenses as we go into the live performance world. Our expenses are going to be tripling. So whatever support you can give us will be greatly appreciated. If you want to donate, go to trudonate.com, trudonate.com. That's trudonate.com. Thank you, everyone, and I'll see you next week when we'll be talking about television.